in the heart of black neighborhoods across America during the 1970s. Soul food restaurants were far more than places to eat. They were community anchors, cultural institutions, and second homes where generations gathered to share meals, stories, and life itself. The aroma of slow-cooked collard greens, perfectly seasoned fried chicken, and sweet potato pie would drift through the streets, calling people home. These establishments held the recipes passed down through slavery, migration, and struggle. Recipes that carried the taste of survival, celebration, and love. But as urban renewal projects swept through black neighborhoods, economic pressures mounted, and chains moved in. Many of these beloved gathering places closed their doors forever. What was lost was not just food, but the very heartbeat of communities. Here are 20 soul food restaurants from the 1970s that closed forever, taking irreplaceable pieces of black culinary and cultural heritage with them. 1. Sylvia's original location, Harlem, New York. Before Sylvia's became the international brand it is today, the original small storefront on Lenox Avenue was where it all began in 1962. By the 1970s, this modest restaurant had become the soul food destination in Harlem. Sylvia Woods herself would greet customers at the door, her apron dusted with flour for making fresh cornbread in the back kitchen. The restaurant sat maybe 40 people comfortably, with red vinyl booths and checkered tablecloths that had seen thousands of Sunday dinners. Politicians, musicians, and everyday working folks would wait in line together, the smell of her smothered chicken and candied yams making the wait worthwhile. What made this location irreplaceable was its intimacy. You could hear Sylvia laughing in the kitchen, see her daughter Bedelia serving plates with genuine warmth, and feel like you were eating in someone's home rather than a restaurant. The collard greens were cooked with smoked turkey. The mac and cheese had that perfect golden crust on top, and the peach cobbler came out piping hot with a scoop of vanilla ice cream melting into the crust. Regulars had their own tables, and Sylvia knew their orders by heart. When the restaurant expanded and moved to its current larger location in the late 70s, something was lost. The new space was necessary for business, but the original spot had an irreplaceable magic. That feeling of being in Sylvia's actual dining room, breaking bread with family. That intimate connection between chef and community. That sense of home, closed forever with those original doors. 2 Dookie Chase's original dream location, New Orleans, Louisiana. Long before Hurricane Katrina, before the current restaurant became a landmark. Dookie Chase's original location in the Treem neighborhood was where Leah Chase revolutionized Creole and soul food fusion. In the 1970s, this restaurant was not just a dining establishment. It was the unofficial headquarters of the civil rights movement in New Orleans. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Thurgood Marshall, and local organizers would meet in the back room, planning strategy over plates of Leah's famous gumbo and fried chicken. The restaurant operated under the constant threat of violence for daring to serve integrated groups in a city still deeply divided. The dining room had an elegance that defied stereotypes about soul food establishments. White tablecloths, fresh flowers on every table, and original artwork by black artists lined the walls. Leah insisted that her community deserved fine dining, not just good food. Her shrimp clemenceau became legendary. Plump Gulf shrimp sautéed with mushrooms, peas, and potatoes in a garlic butter sauce that made you close your eyes with the first bite. The gumbo was dark as midnight, thick with file, and packed with seafood, so fresh it had been swimming that morning. But it was more than the food. This was where black professionals could celebrate promotions, where families held wedding receptions, where teenagers took their dates to feel sophisticated. When the original building was demolished for urban development in the late 70s, the restaurant relocated. But that specific space, with its history soaked into the walls, where freedom was planned over cornbread, was lost forever. The new location carries the legacy, but those walls witnessed history that can never be rebuilt. 3. Edna's Restaurant, Detroit, Michigan. On the corner of 12th Street and Claremont in Detroit's once thriving Black Bottom neighborhood, Edna's Restaurant fed auto workers, musicians from nearby clubs, and families every day from 1948 until its closure in 1976. Edna Lewis ran her kitchen with military precision, arriving at 4 a.m. to start the collard greens and black-eyed peas that would simmer for hours. By the 1970s, the restaurant had become a Detroit institution, known for serving what people called the best fried catfish north of Mississippi. The fish came in fresh from suppliers who knew Edna wouldn't accept anything less than perfect, and she fried it in a cast-iron skillet, seasoned over 30 years. The restaurant occupied a long, narrow building with a lunch counter that sat 15 and booths that lined the opposite wall. The walls were covered in photographs, Edna with Motown stars who stopped by after recording sessions, Edna serving meals during the 1967 riots, Edna at community fundraisers. The menu was written on a chalkboard that changed daily based on what was fresh and what Edna felt like cooking. Thursdays always meant oxtails, slow-cooked until the meat fell off the bone, served over rice with the rich, brown gravy that people would sop up with white bread. When the auto industry started declining and white flight accelerated, the neighborhood changed. Crime increased, businesses closed, and foot traffic disappeared. Edna fought to keep her doors open, but by 1976, at 68 years old and facing mounting losses, she locked the door for the last time. Regular customers wept openly that final day. This was not just about losing a restaurant. It was about losing anchor as their entire community disintegrated around them. The building was demolished in 1979, and today nothing remains but memories and a few faded photographs. 4. Pascal's original location, Atlanta, Georgia. Before Pascal's moved to its current location, the original restaurant on Hunter Street in Atlanta's historically black business district was where the civil rights movement was fed, literally and figuratively. Robert and James Pascal opened their modest sandwich shop in 1947, and by the 1970s, it had expanded into a full restaurant and hotel complex that served as unofficial headquarters for movement leaders. Martin Luther King Jr. held strategy sessions in the restaurant's back room. Student organizers from nearby colleges would fuel their activism with plates of Pascal's famous fried chicken, which had a crispy, peppery coating that was somehow both light and substantial. The restaurant felt like stepping into someone's well-appointed home. Dark wood paneling, comfortable booths, and waitresses who called regular customers by name created an atmosphere of dignity and respect, something black Atlantans couldn't always find in public spaces during Jim Crow and its aftermath. The menu was Southern soul food at its finest. Fried chicken, of course, but also perfectly seasoned collard greens cooked with smoked ham hocks, creamy mac and cheese, and cornbread that had just a hint of sweetness. The peach cobbler was legendary, served warm with the peaches swimming in their own syrup and a buttery crust that shattered under your fork. Beyond the food, Pascal's was where Black Atlanta conducted business, celebrated victories, and mourned losses together. When the original location closed in the early 1970s due to urban development and the restaurant relocated, something essential was lost. The new location continues the legacy, but that specific space, where freedom songs were sung over sweet tea, where strategies for desegregation were planned over fried chicken, exists now only in memory and in the stories older Atlantans tell their grandchildren. 5. Florida Avenue Grill, Washington, D.C. Though a restaurant by this name still exists, the original Florida Avenue Grill that operated from 1944 until it was sold and transformed in 1979 was an entirely different establishment. Located in the Shaw neighborhood, this was where Black D.C. came to eat what they called serious food. The original owner, Lacey C. Wilson Sr., ran the restaurant with his wife, Bertha, who did most of the cooking. By the 1970s, their daughter had taken over, but Bertha's recipes remained unchanged. The restaurant opened at 6 a.m. to catch the breakfast crowd, construction workers, hospital staff coming off night shifts, and early rising churchgoers on Sunday mornings. The breakfast was what drew people in first. Scrapple fried crispy on the flat-top grill, thick-cut bacon, eggs cooked any way you wanted, and grits so creamy they seemed to melt on the tongue. The grits were the real test of a soul food restaurant, and Florida Avenue's grits were cooked slow with real butter and just enough salt to bring out their natural sweetness. But the lunch menu was equally impressive. The meatloaf came in thick slabs covered in brown gravy. The fried pork chops had edges that crisped up perfectly, and the potato salad had a mustardy tang that cut through the richness of everything else on the plate. What made this location special was its role as a meeting place across class lines. Congressmen who represented black districts ate alongside janitors who cleaned the Capitol. Howard University professors debated over coffee, while postal workers grabbed quick lunches at the counter. The restaurant's U-shaped counter created a forced community. You sat elbow to elbow with strangers who became friends over shared meals. When the original owners sold in 1979 and the new owners changed the recipes and atmosphere to appeal to a broader audience, regulars mourned. They still had a restaurant to visit, but the soul of the place, literally and figuratively, had been sold away. 6. Roscoe's original South Central location, Los Angeles, California. Before Roscoe's House of Chicken and Waffles became a multi-location empire, the original restaurant on Pico Boulevard in South Central Los Angeles was a small, unassuming spot that Roscoe opened in 1975. By the late 70s, it had become the after-hours destination for everyone from construction workers to musicians finishing late-night recording sessions. The combination of crispy fried chicken and fluffy Belgian waffles seemed bizarre to outsiders, but to the black community, it made perfect sense. A meal that worked for breakfast, lunch, dinner, or that uncertain hour after midnight when you needed comfort food. The original location sat maybe 30 people, with a mix of tables and counter seating. The kitchen was visible from the dining room, and you could watch the cooks expertly frying chicken in massive cast iron skillets, the oil bubbling and popping, filling the air with that unmistakable aroma of perfectly seasoned frying poultry. The waffles came out golden brown, crispy on the outside and steamy soft inside, served with butter melting into the squares and syrup on the side. The chicken was brined overnight, coated in a secret spice mixture, and fried to order. No heat lamps, no sitting around getting soggy. But what made the original location irreplaceable was its role as a cultural crossroads. This was where different segments of the black community mixed freely. Gang members observed unofficial truces to eat in peace. Street vendors shared tables with aspiring actors. The restaurant's walls were covered with photos of celebrities who had stopped by, musicians, athletes, actors. But the real celebrities were the regulars who came in 5 days a week, whose orders the staff knew by heart. When the restaurant expanded and this location eventually closed to make way for newer, larger locations, something essential about that original democratic mixing space was lost. The food was the same, but the magic of that specific place, where South Central came together over chicken and waffles in the middle of the night, closed forever. 7. Mrs. Benson's Kitchen, Chicago, Illinois. On the south side of Chicago, in the Bronzeville neighborhood that had been the heart of black Chicago since the Great Migration, Mrs. Geraldine Benson ran her restaurant with the same loving strictness she used raising 7 children. From 1958 until 1978, Mrs. Benson's Kitchen was where you went for food that tasted exactly like Sunday dinner at your grandmother's house. Mrs. Benson herself was usually in the dining room, a tall woman with silver hair always neatly pinned up, wearing clean aprons embroidered with her name. She would greet customers by name, ask about their families, and occasionally tell someone their plate looked too full for how little you've been exercising. The menu never changed because, as Mrs. Benson said, perfection doesn't need improving. Monday through Saturday, you got a choice of 3 meats, usually fried chicken, baked chicken, and either pork chops or meatloaf, for sides from a selection of 8 and cornbread or rolls. Sunday was special. After church, the menu expanded to include pot roast, ham, turkey wings, and her famous 7-layer cake for dessert. The fried chicken was brined in buttermilk overnight, coated in flour seasoned with her secret mixture. Regulars swore they could taste paprika, garlic powder, and something else nobody could identify, and fried in lard, not oil. The result was chicken so crispy it crackled when you bit into it, yet so juicy it practically melted off the bone. The restaurant occupied a storefront with big windows facing the street, lace curtains filtering the light, and tables covered with plastic tablecloths topped with glass. Mrs. Benson's granddaughters worked as waitresses, and the whole operation felt like being invited into a family business, which it was. When Mrs. Benson died in 1978, her children tried to keep it going for 6 months, but nobody could replicate her touch in the kitchen or her presence in the dining room. They closed the restaurant rather than let the quality decline, honoring her memory by preserving it rather than diluting it. The building still stands, now housing a dry cleaner. But older residents walking past sometimes stop and close their eyes, swearing they can still smell her fried chicken on Sunday mornings. 8. The Copper Skillet, Oakland, California. In West Oakland during the 1970s, the Copper Skillet occupied a corner building with windows on two sides, flooding the dining room with California sunshine. Sam and Lucille Porter opened the restaurant in 1963, and by the early 70s, it had become the breakfast and lunch destination for everyone from Black Panthers, loading up before community programs, to longshoremen starting their shifts at the port. The name came from the actual copper skillets hanging on the walls, Lucille's collection from years of cooking, polished to a shine and displayed like artwork. The Copper Skillet specialized in what the Porters called breakfast for working people, substantial, affordable food that would fuel you through a long day. The portions were generous without being wasteful. The chicken fried steak covered the entire plate, served with eggs, hash browns cooked on the flat top until crispy, and biscuits made from scratch every morning at 4 a.m. Lucille's biscuits had layers that pulled apart like butterfly wings, perfect for sopping up the sausage gravy that was black pepper forward and thick enough to stick to your ribs. The grits came with a pat of butter melting in the center. And if you ordered them with cheese, Lucille used real sharp cheddar, not that processed cheese food other places used. But the Copper Skillet was more than food. It was community infrastructure. During the height of the Black Panther Party's activity in Oakland, the restaurant served as an informal meeting place and message center. Lucille let organizers use the back room for planning sessions, never charging them rent. When police harassment of black-owned businesses increased in the mid-70s, the Copper Skillet faced constant inspections, citation threats, and pressure. By 1977, between the harassment, rising costs, and Sam's declining health, they closed the restaurant. The building was later demolished for a freeway expansion that never happened. Today, that corner sits empty, a vacant lot where West Oakland residents once started their days with Hope hot coffee and Lucille Porter's biscuits. 9. Sweet Mama's, Memphis, Tennessee. On Beale Street, before it became a tourist destination, Sweet Mama's restaurant served Memphis soul food from 1955 until 1979. S.E. Sweet Mama Johnson earned her nickname for two reasons: her disposition, which was genuinely warm and welcoming, and her desserts, which were legendary throughout the Mid-South. Sweet Mama's occupied a two-story building with a restaurant downstairs and Sweet Mama's apartment above, so the smell of her cooking perfumed the air 24 hours a day. The restaurant specialty was what Memphis folks call wet barbecue ribs and pulled pork swimming in a thin, tangy sauce that was more vinegar and spice than tomato-based sweetness. The ribs at Sweet Mama's fell off the bone, but not in that overcooked, mushy way that meant bad barbecue. These were cooked slow and low until the meat released from the bone with just the gentlest pull, the exterior caramelized with sauce and smoke, the interior tender and pink with that smoke ring that signaled serious pit cooking. The pulled pork came piled high on white bread, the bread soaking up the juice and sauce, served with coleslaw that had both mayo and vinegar dressing, creating a creamy, tangy contrast to the rich meat. The beans were baked with pieces of burnt ends mixed in, and the potato salad had both yellow mustard and hard-boiled eggs, the way Memphis people preferred it. But what people really came for were Sweet Mama's desserts. Her sweet potato pie had a filling so smooth and perfectly spiced with cinnamon nutmeg and a hint of vanilla that grown men would tear up tasting it, remembering their own grandmother's cooking. The pound cake was dense and buttery, with a crust on the outside and a tender crumb inside, perfect with a cup of strong coffee. When Beale Street started its transformation in the late 70s, property values increased, and Sweet Mama faced pressure to sell. At 72, tired and facing health problems, she accepted an offer and retired. The building became a souvenir shop, and while Beale Street now thrives as a tourist destination, old-time Memphians mourn the loss of Sweet Mama's and the authentic Black Memphis it represented, a Memphis made for Memphis people, not for tourists with cameras. 10 Carver's Kitchen, Birmingham, Alabama. In the shadow of Birmingham's Civil Rights District, Carver's Kitchen operated from 1961 to 1977. serving soul food to the people who were fighting to change the world. Named after George Washington Carver, the restaurant was owned by John and Martha Carver, no relation, who believed that feeding people well was its own form of activism. The restaurant's location, just blocks from Kelly Ingram Park and the 16th Street Baptist Church, meant it served as a refuge during some of Birmingham's most violent years. Protesters would come in after demonstrations, sometimes still wet from fire hoses or shaking from encounters with police dogs, and the Carvers would feed them, often for free. The food at Carver's Kitchen was straightforward, honest soul food. The fried catfish was cornmeal crusted and came with hush puppies that had a slight sweetness to balance the savory fish. The greens were cooked with ham hocks until they were tender but still had some texture, not mushy like some restaurants serve them. The cornbread was made in cast iron skillets, so each piece had a crispy bottom and sides while staying moist in the middle. But the dish that defined Carver's Kitchen was Martha's chicken and dumplings, made the old way with flat, rolled-out dumplings that cooked in the chicken broth until they were tender and silky, soaking up all the flavor from the stewed chicken. The dining room had photographs covering every wall, not just decorative pictures, but documentation. Photographs of protests of freedom riders, of local children integrating schools, of the bombed church. Eating at Carver's meant being surrounded by the living history of the civil rights movement. When John Carver died suddenly in 1976, Martha tried to continue alone, but the emotional weight of running the restaurant without her partner proved too much. She closed Carver's Kitchen in 1977, and the building was later purchased by a development company and demolished to make way for parking. Today, visitors to Birmingham civil rights sites walk past where Carver's Kitchen once stood, unaware that they're passing over ground where history was both made and digested, where the fuel for freedom came in the form of fried catfish and chicken and dumplings. 11. Brothers Keeper, Newark, New Jersey. In Newark Central Ward, Brothers Keeper Restaurant represented black self-determination and community care from its opening in 1970 until its closure in 1978. The restaurant was founded by three brothers, Marcus, James, and William Turner, who had grown up in Newark and returned after college determined to invest in their community. The name was deliberate, a reference to Cain's question in Genesis, "Am I my brother's keeper?" and an answer through action. The Turners operated the restaurant as a community space first, business second. They hired people from the neighborhood, including those with criminal records who couldn't find work elsewhere. They provided free meals to children whose families were struggling. The food at Brothers Keeper reflected the brothers' philosophy. Quality ingredients, prepared with care, offered at prices working families could afford. The menu rotated weekly based on what was fresh and affordable at the market. One week might feature smothered pork chops with onion gravy so thick and flavorful you wanted to drink it, served with collard greens and candied yams that had a perfect balance of sweet and savory. Another week might offer baked chicken with sage dressing, never stuffing. Southerners who'd migrated to Newark insisted on the distinction. Green beans cooked with fatback and macaroni and cheese that formed a perfect golden crust on top while staying creamy underneath. The restaurant occupied a former storefront that the brothers renovated themselves, painting murals of African-American heroes on the walls. Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth. They installed a small stage in one corner where local musicians played on weekends and community organizers could speak. After the 1967 Newark riots, Brothers Keeper became a center for rebuilding efforts. But by the mid-70s, Newark's economic decline was accelerating. Despite their best efforts, the brothers couldn't keep the restaurant profitable while maintaining their community mission. They closed in 1978, and Marcus Turner later said, "We didn't fail. The system failed us." The building was eventually torn down, but former customers and employees still gather annually to commemorate what Brothers Keeper represented, an attempt to build the world they wanted to see, one meal at a time. 12. Queen's Palace, Houston, Texas. In Houston's Third Ward, Queen's Palace ruled from 1964 to 1979, serving soul food with a Texas twist. Queenie Mae Johnson, who gave the restaurant its name, was known for two things: her absolutely no-nonsense attitude and her smothered steak that could make you forget every other meal you'd ever eaten. The restaurant occupied a building painted bright pink, so people can't miss us, Queenie would say, with the interior decorated in purple and gold. Queenie believed soul food restaurants deserved to be beautiful, that her community deserved elegance with their meals. The star of Queen's Palace menu was a smothered steak, cube steak pounded tender, dredged in seasoned flour, fried until crispy, then covered in a thick brown gravy studded with onions and mushrooms. The steak was so tender you could cut it with a fork, and the gravy had layers of flavor from the pan drippings, beef stock, and Queenie's secret seasoning blend. It came with rice, never mashed potatoes. This is Texas, Queenie would say. We eat rice. Gravy-soaked white bread, and your choice of two sides. The okra and tomatoes were stewed together until the okra lost its sliminess, and the tomatoes broke down into a thick, savory sauce. The black-eyed peas were always cooked with a ham hock, and at a pot liquor so flavorful people would order extra cornbread just to sop it up. But Queenie's real genius was creating space where Third Ward residents could feel regal. She trained her waitstaff to treat every customer like royalty. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Can I bring you anything else, Your Majesty? Said with genuine warmth, not mockery. The china wasn't fancy, but it was real china, not paper plates. The silverware was actual silver-plated utensils, not plastic forks. When people suggested she could save money with disposables, Queenie responded, "My people deserve better than eating like they're a picnic." In 1979, facing mounting debt and health problems, Queenie sold the restaurant. The new owners stripped away the purple and gold, replaced the china with paper plates, and renamed it Soul Food Express. It closed within a year. Queenie died in 1982. But Third Ward residents still talk about Queen's Palace as a standard against which all soul food restaurants should be measured. Not just for the food, but for the dignity and respect baked into every aspect of the dining experience. 13. The Friendly Inn, Richmond, Virginia. Despite its modest name, the Friendly Inn in Richmond's Jackson Ward neighborhood was anything but humble. From 1956 to 1978, this restaurant represented Black excellence in hospitality and cuisine. The owner, Robert Bobby Jenkins, had trained at Hampton Institute and worked in white tablecloth restaurants where Black chefs cooked but couldn't dine. When he opened the Friendly Inn, he was determined to provide the Black community with the same quality dining experience he'd helped create for white customers. The restaurant's interior challenged every stereotype about soul food establishments. White linen tablecloths, fresh flowers on every table, waiters in crisp white jackets and bow ties, and big band music playing softly in the background. The menu was printed daily on cream-colored cardstock, listing the day's offerings in elegant script. But the food was pure soul, elevated, refined, but unmistakably rooted in Black Southern cooking traditions. The fried chicken was marinated in sweet tea and buttermilk for 24 hours before being dredged in seasoned flour and fried in peanut oil. The result was chicken so flavorful and juicy that it needed no sauce, though Bobby's hot honey, regular honey infused with cayenne peppers, was available for those who wanted it. The Sunday dinner menu was legendary. Roasted turkey with sage dressing, baked ham with a brown sugar and mustard glaze, beef short ribs braised until they fell apart, sides including macaroni and cheese made with 3 different cheeses, collard greens cooked with smoked turkey instead of pork, and sweet potato casserole topped with pecans and a hint of bourbon. Dessert was always included, red velvet cake, lemon pound cake, or sweet potato pie, and served with real whipped cream, not the canned stuff. The Friendly Inn was where Black Richmond celebrated. Graduations, wedding anniversaries, business deals, family reunions. Bobby Jenkins hosted them all with pride and professionalism. When Jackson Ward began its decline in the 1970s, as highways cut through the neighborhood and urban renewal displaced residents, foot traffic decreased. Bobby fought to keep the restaurant open, but by 1978, he could no longer sustain the losses. The restaurant closed and Bobby died just 2 years later. Former customers said he died of a broken heart. The building stood empty for years before being demolished. Today, Richmond's Jackson Ward is experiencing a renaissance, with new restaurants charging high prices for elevated Southern cuisine. Older residents shake their heads, remembering that Bobby Jenkins was doing elevated Southern cuisine in the 1950s, when the people cooking in these new restaurants weren't even born yet. 14. Taste of Home, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In North Philadelphia, Taste of Home operated from 1968 to 1977, earning its name through food that genuinely tasted like it came from someone's kitchen, not a commercial establishment. The owner, Clara Washington, ran the restaurant out of the first floor of her row house, with her actual kitchen serving as a restaurant kitchen and her dining room and front room converted into dining space for customers. There were maybe 10 tables total, and during lunch rush, people would wait on Clara's front porch, just like they would wait on a relative's porch for Sunday dinner. Clara's specialty was what she called Philly soul food, traditional Southern soul food with Philadelphia influences. Her scrapple was legendary. Fried until the outside was crispy and the inside was creamy, served for breakfast with eggs and grits. The pork chops were thick cut, seasoned with nothing but salt, pepper, and garlic powder, and pan-fried until they had a golden brown crust. But the dish that defined Taste of Home was Clara's citywide special, a hoagie roll stuffed with fried chicken tenders, mac and cheese, collard greens, and hot sauce, wrapped in foil. It was messy, it was untraditional, but it was pure Philadelphia, and construction workers and nurses would line up for it. The dining space felt exactly like eating in someone's home, because you were. Family photos covered the walls, Clara's grandchildren, her wedding picture, her parents who had migrated from South Carolina. The tables were actually Clara's own furniture, including her grandmother's dining room table. The china was mismatched, whatever Clara had accumulated over the years. And Clara herself moved between the kitchen and dining room, chatting with customers, offering more food, scolding people for not eating enough vegetables. When Clara's health declined in 1976, her children urged her to close the restaurant and rest. She fought them for months, but finally agreed in 1977. Regular customers came by on the last day, many in tears, bringing her flowers and cards. Clara gave away her recipes to anyone who asked, saying, "Food is meant to be shared, not hoarded." She died 6 months later. The row house was sold, and new owners gutted the first floor, removing every trace of what had been there. But North Philadelphia residents who ate at Taste of Home still say that no restaurant, not even the fanciest soul food place, has ever replicated what Clara Washington created. Food made with the same love, care, and attention she would give her own family. 15. The Down Home Diner, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Milwaukee's black community, concentrated on the north side, had the Down Home Diner from 1965 to 1978. The name captured the restaurant's entire philosophy. This was down home cooking transplanted north, served in a diner setting that made nobody feel fancy, but everybody feel welcome. Tommy and Shirley Green, who had migrated from Mississippi in the early 1960s, opened the restaurant because, as Tommy said, "We got tired of eating boring Yankee food. We wanted something that tasted like home." The restaurant occupied a long, narrow building with a lunch counter running down one side and booths on the other. The decor was pure 1960s diner, chrome and red vinyl, black and white checker floor, and a jukebox that played Motown, Stax, and gospel music. The menu was written on a board behind the counter and never changed. Fried catfish, fried chicken, pork chops, meatloaf, with sides of greens, mac and cheese, black-eyed peas, corn, and cornbread or biscuits. Simple, straightforward, exactly what folks wanted. Tommy's catfish was Milwaukee's best-kept secret. He sourced whole catfish from a supplier in Mississippi who shipped them frozen, and Tommy would personally fillet each fish, season them with salt, pepper, cayenne, and garlic powder, then dredge them in cornmeal mixed with a little flour. The result was catfish with a crunchy, golden crust and flaky, mild flesh inside. Shirley's mac and cheese was what people called baked mac and cheese, made with multiple cheeses, eggs, and evaporated milk, baked until it had a golden crust on top, but stayed creamy underneath. The greens were cooked Southern style, low and slow with ham hocks, until they were tender and the pot liquor was rich enough to drink like soup. The Down Home Diner became a gathering place for Milwaukee's black community, especially for people who had migrated from the South and missed home cooking. When Milwaukee's North Side experienced economic decline in the 1970s, businesses began closing. The Greens fought to keep the restaurant open, But after Tommy had a heart attack in 1978, Shirley decided their health was more important than the business. They closed the diner and moved to a smaller house in a quieter neighborhood. The diner building was eventually razed, and today, a small park sits where the down-home diner once stood. But older Milwaukee residents, especially those who migrated from the South, still talk about Tommy and Shirley's place as proof that you could take folks out of the South, but you couldn't take the South out of their cooking or out of their hearts. 16 Sister Sarah's, St. Louis, Missouri. In St. Louis's Ville neighborhood, Sister Sarah's served soul food from 1959 to 1977. Sarah Johnson earned her sister title from her church, where she was known for feeding the congregation after services, and she brought that same spirit of Christian hospitality to her restaurant. The restaurant was decorated with Bible verses painted on the walls in Sarah's own handwriting, and gospel music played constantly, not contemporary gospel, but the old hymns that Sarah had grown up singing in rural Missouri. The food at Sister Sarah's was what older folks called sanctified soul food. No pork, ever. Sarah was Seventh-day Adventist and ran her restaurant according to her religious principles. No pork meant she got creative with her cooking. The greens were cooked with smoked turkey wings, which gave them a deep, savory flavor without violating her dietary laws. The bacon was actually turkey bacon, crispy and smoky. Even the beans were made without ham hocks. She used liquid smoke and a combination of onions, garlic, and spices that gave them a rich, complex flavor that made you forget there was no pork. But Sister Sarah's real magic was her baked chicken. She marinated chicken pieces overnight in a mixture that included lemon juice, herbs, and secret spices. Then baked them low and slow until the skin was crispy and golden, and the meat was so tender it fell off the bone. The result was chicken that was healthier than fried, but just as flavorful and satisfying. Her dressing, made with cornbread, onion, celery, and sage, was so good that people who normally insisted on traditional Southern dressing with pork products admitted that Sarah's vegetarian version was better than their grandmother's. Sister Sarah's closed not because of economic problems, but because Sarah wanted to spend her final years focused on ministry. At 72, she felt called to close the restaurant and devote herself full-time to church work. On the last day of service, she held a prayer circle with her staff and regular customers, thanking God for the opportunity to serve His children through food. The building was purchased by a congregation that turned it into a church, which Sarah said was perfect. The space continuing to feed souls, just in a different way. But St. Louis residents who ate at Sister Sarah's remember it as proof that soul food wasn't about pork. It was about love, care, and putting your heart into every dish. 17. Paradise Soul Kitchen, Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland's Glenville neighborhood had Paradise Soul Kitchen from 1963 to 1979, and the restaurant lived up to its name. The owner, James Jimmy Paradise, yes, that was his real surname, created a space that felt like paradise for Cleveland's black community. The restaurant was painted in bright colors, orange, yellow, and turquoise, with murals on the walls depicting black families enjoying meals together, children playing, and scenes from black history. Jimmy believed that soul food restaurants should be joyful places, and every element of Paradise Soul Kitchen reflected that belief. The food was Cleveland soul food, which meant a blend of Southern traditions with Midwestern ingredients and sensibilities. The fried perch, caught fresh from Lake Erie, became the restaurant's signature. Cornmeal battered and fried until crispy, served with white bread, hot sauce, and coleslaw. The spaghetti was a Cleveland soul food staple, served with a meat sauce that was sweeter and more tomato-forward than Italian red sauce, topped with shredded cheddar cheese instead of Parmesan. Outsiders thought it was strange, but Clevelanders, black and white, grew up on this version of spaghetti and wouldn't have it any other way. But Paradise Soul Kitchen's Sunday menu was what people talked about. Jimmy's wife, Dorothy, took over the kitchen on Sundays, preparing a rotating menu of her best dishes. One Sunday might feature pot roast with carrots, potatoes, and onions, all cooked in a rich beef gravy. Another Sunday might offer turkey wings, baked until fall-apart tender, with homemade cranberry sauce. The sides always included Dorothy's famous baked beans, which had bits of brisket mixed in and a sauce that was sweet, tangy, and had just a hint of heat. The cornbread came out in cast iron skillets, cut into wedges, with butter melting into the warm bread. Paradise Soul Kitchen closed when the Paradises retired in 1979, moving to North Carolina to be closer to their grandchildren. They tried to sell the restaurant to someone who would continue their legacy, but potential buyers either couldn't get financing or wanted to change too much about the concept. Rather than see their creation altered beyond recognition, they closed it permanently. The building stood empty for years, the bright murals fading behind boarded-up windows, before being demolished in the mid-1980s. But older Clevelanders remember Paradise Soul Kitchen as exactly what it was, a little piece of paradise in a challenging neighborhood, where good food and community love could transport you, if only for an hour, to somewhere better. 18 Annie Lou's, Seattle, Washington. Seattle's Central District had Annie Lou's Kitchen from 1967 to 1978, bringing Southern soul food to the Pacific Northwest. Annie Lou Williamson had moved to Seattle from Louisiana in the 1950s, following her husband who found work in the shipyards. By the mid-60s, as Seattle's black population grew with more Southern migrants, Annie Lou saw an opportunity to open a restaurant serving the food people miss from home. The menu at Annie Lou's was pure Louisiana soul food, which meant it had more spice, more flavor, and more complexity than soul food from other regions. The red beans and rice were a Monday tradition, cooked with smoked sausage, the holy trinity of Louisiana cooking: onions, bell peppers, and celery, and seasoned with cayenne, black pepper, and bay leaves. The beans were cooked until creamy, some breaking down to thicken the gravy, while others stayed whole and tender. Served over white rice with cornbread on the side. This was comfort food that warmed you up from the inside. Perfect for Seattle's gray, rainy days. The gumbo at Annie Lou's was famous throughout Seattle's black community. She made it the way her grandmother had taught her, starting with a dark root cooked until it was almost black, adding the trinity, then seafood or chicken and andouille sausage, depending on the day. The gumbo was thick, rich, and complex, with layers of flavor that revealed themselves as you ate. She always served it with potato salad on the side, a Louisiana tradition that confused outsiders but made perfect sense to anyone who'd grown up eating gumbo this way. Annie Lou's closed when she decided to return to Louisiana in 1978. Seattle had been good to her family, but after her husband died, she wanted to spend her remaining years back home. She tried to find someone to take over the restaurant, but nobody could replicate her gumbo or her approach to Louisiana cooking. She packed up, returned to Louisiana, and the restaurant closed. The building was converted into a hair salon, and today, nothing visible remains of Annie Lou's Kitchen. But Seattle residents who ate there, many now in their 70s and 80s, still talk about Annie Lou's as the place that brought Louisiana to the Pacific Northwest, proving that soul food could thrive anywhere black people gathered and missed the taste of home. 19. The Community Table, Boston, Massachusetts. In Boston's Roxbury neighborhood, the Community Table operated from 1970 to 1977, living up to its name as a true community space. The restaurant was founded as a cooperative. 12 black families pooled resources to open a restaurant that would serve the neighborhood. Each family contributed recipes, and the menu rotated based on who was cooking that week, creating a varied soul food experience that reflected the diversity of the black community in Roxbury. People from the Carolinas, Georgia, Louisiana, and the Caribbean islands. This rotating menu meant the Community Table offered something different every week. One week might feature Geechee-style red rice, cooked with tomatoes, onions, and sausage until the rice absorbed all the flavorful liquid and had a slightly crispy bottom layer. Another week might offer Caribbean-influenced dishes like oxtails cooked with thyme, Scotch bonnet peppers, and butter beans. A third week might feature North Carolina-style barbecue, with vinegar-based sauce and coleslaw mixed right into the pulled pork sandwich. The restaurant's communal approach extended beyond the menu. Long tables dominated the dining room. You sat wherever there was space, often next to strangers who became friends over shared meals. The walls were covered with community announcements, artwork by local children, and photographs of neighborhood events. The Community Table hosted free community dinners once a month, where neighborhood residents could eat regardless of ability to pay. But the cooperative structure that made the Community Table special also contributed to its closure. Managing 12 family schedules, Resolving conflicts about recipes and operations and maintaining quality control proved increasingly difficult. By 1977, several founding families had moved away. Conflicts had emerged about the restaurant's direction, and the cooperative voted to dissolve and close the community table. The building was sold, and the 12 families divided the modest proceeds. Some of the founding members still live in Roxbury, and they occasionally get together for potluck dinners, reminiscing about the community table and the experiment in community ownership that for 7 years proved that a different model was possible, that a restaurant could be truly owned by and for its community. 20. Home Plate, Baltimore, Maryland. In West Baltimore, Home Plate served soul food from 1962 to 1979, and the name came from the owner's love of baseball. Charles "Chick" Rivers had been a talented Negro League player before the leagues folded, and he decorated his restaurant with baseball memorabilia, signed balls, old uniforms, photographs of Negro League teams. The dining room was arranged so that the main counter formed a diamond shape, and Chick called the 4 sections first base, second base, third base, and home plate. Regular customers had their preferred bases, and Chick would greet them with baseball puns, "Welcome home," or "You're safe at second." The food at Home Plate was Baltimore soul food, which meant it incorporated the city's love of seafood with Southern traditions. Crab cakes made with jumbo lump crab meat, Old Bay seasoning, and just enough breading to hold them together appeared on the menu alongside more traditional soul food dishes. The result was a crab cake soul food hybrid that satisfied both cravings. The crab cakes were served with collard greens and cornbread, creating a meal that was purely Baltimore. But Chick's real specialty was his fried chicken and waffles, a dish he discovered during barnstorming tours through California. Long before Roscoe's made the combination famous, Chick was serving it in Baltimore to late-night crowds of musicians, factory workers, and anyone else who wandered in hungry. His chicken was perfectly fried, crispy on the outside and juicy inside, and his waffles were crispy on the outside and fluffy inside, served with butter and syrup. The combination seemed odd to first-timers, but after one bite they understood. The salty, savory chicken played perfectly off the sweet, buttery waffles. Home Plate closed when Chick died suddenly in 1979. He had no children, and while several employees offered to buy the restaurant, none could secure financing. The restaurant closed, and the baseball memorabilia was auctioned off to pay Chick's debts. The building was converted into a liquor store, and today, nothing remains of Home Plate except memories and a few photographs that occasionally surface at Negro League baseball exhibitions. But older Baltimore residents who ate at Home Plate remember it as a place where baseball, community, and soul food came together, where a failed athlete created something more lasting than any baseball career could have been, feeding his community with love, humor, and the best fried chicken and waffles Baltimore ever tasted.